Welcome to Happy Path Programming. I'm Bruce Eckel.
I'm James Ward. All right. Well, welcome. Yay. Here we are. Been a few weeks, but today we have with us Domen. Did I say that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And you are, well, I'll have you introduce yourself. But the reason why we had you on is because so many times on the podcast and on Twitter and places, everyone tells us that Nix is the thing we dream of. It's like when I complain about anything, they're like, "Oh, Nix solves that," and we just hear that over and over and over again. And so we thought we'd have an episode on Nix so that we can learn more about it and explore how it will solve.
And the upcoming episode stimulated us to take a dive into it.
That's right.
I ended up installing Nix on a Windows subsystem for Linux. There were a few hiccups there, but it's working now. So, I put in an issue when I got stuck, and I ended up solving it. So it's sort of a
solved your own issue.
If somebody has trouble installing it, then just go look for my issue on their.
And specifically installing it in WSL.
Yeah, because it's not an officially supported package or
distribution.
Distribution. That's correct, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like some people use it and they contribute fixes, but it's not actively tested. So it's good to open the issues and keep it going.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start with about you. This is the first we've met you, and so tell us who you are and what you do, and what your history with Nix is.
Oh, there's a lot of history. I'll try to keep it short.
I didn't realize it started like 15 years ago. That was surprising to me because
it's actually 20. There's
20 years ago.
Yeah, there's gonna be like kind of like celebration in March, hopefully, that we're trying to pull together.
And you guys have a conference, and
yes, there's there was a yearly conference. Now it's every 3 years, counting from the last. But there is one, and there's gonna be likely one in US actually, hopefully this year.
Oh, cool, nice. Nice. Okay, so who are you?
Right. So, I've been doing kind of packaging and software distribution work since I was a student. I did a Google Summer of Code for I think 2 or 3 times even.
Nice.
And when was that?
That was 2010, something like this. I think that was the first year. And I used to use Gentoo. That was before
I love
Nix.
Gentoo. Gentoo is one of my favorite things in the world. I don't use it anymore, but just got a little. I didn't want to be a sysadmin anymore, but I ran Gentoo servers, and Gentoo was my desktop. And anyways, Gentoo is great. So glad to hear you got a Gentoo.
I used to love Gentoo, and I still do, and it was my favorite distribution. One of the reasons I switched to Nix from Gentoo was actually that, once I was at a client in Finland and I needed to recompile the whole computer because there was something I needed, and it was quite a hell.
Yeah.
So I needed to find something that works better for those kind of scenarios. But anyway, we can talk about this later. So I did that, and I used to also do Python development, kind of a bit of everything.
Nice.
And I was part of a small community called Plone. It's a very old CMS.
I worked with some of the Plone people, and we had Jim
Fulton.
Jim Fulton. He came out here for a little developer retreat at one point. And
nice.
I've known him for many years, and some of the other people on the Plone. I never figured it out myself. But I got a little bit into it.
Nice.
Yeah. So
they were very smart people there working in the Flow community.
Yeah.
And that brought a lot of good stuff and the bad stuff. So that was interesting. Yeah, I used to work with Plone, and it was still my favorite community out there in open source. But one problem we did have is that it was really big and hard to package. And one day Florian Friesdorf, my friend, came to me and said that, he has some friends who are doing PhD and they know about Nix. So this was, I think, 2012 or something, about more than 10 years ago, I think.
So did Nix start as a PhD project?
Yes, it did. Yeah, Elko Dostro wrote it as a PhD project in Utrecht, which has one of the biggest, I think, in Europe functional language, like I don't know what they're called, laboratories or something in the universities or in the world probably. So yeah. So we tried to use Nix to kind of fix blown packaging, which we didn't end up doing that easily, but I did end up using Nix and going deeper into the whole ecosystem of what has been built there.
Nice. So you dove into the world of Nix and started contributing at some point, and
yes.
And then where are you at now? Like I think I saw there's a company kind of behind Nix that you co-founded. Is that right?
Yes. So I did some. I think it was 2016. I started consulting around Nix, but then quickly I saw that so many people need this that it's consulting is not the best approach because it's too much tailored to specific people. So I created CashX in 2000. Wait, it's been 4 or 5 years. I don't even know. I don't keep track.
Yeah,
I think
COVID
2018. And it grew up basically out of a simple project, which is okay. So in Nix, you have this concept where you can build a package and distribute it to some file system
repository,
storage like S3 or something.
Yeah.
And then if you build the same package again, which has the same hash, and this hash kind of means that it is exactly the same package, then you can kind of short circuit that process of building the package and just get the binary and skip the whole build. So that source versus binary distribution is not a dilemma anymore. It's kind of a design choice in Nix that you can have both. And so what CashX did was created a project where you can just, with a few clicks, create your own namespace, your own thing. And, it's really nice because for GitHub small projects, for open source projects or private projects, it makes it much easier to set up. And then I created a company which does like a freemium model like GitHub. Private stuff is paid and public stuff is kind of free.
Nice.
That's
so the core technology then is the like binary cache side underneath Nix or something. Is that?
Yeah.
Nice.
That's the main thing that CashX does. And then based on customers paying for this, I've been working on CashX, and I did Nix.dev, which is I think still one of the best resources to learn Nix today. I wrote
Nice.
about 15 tutorials, like how to set it up for Raspberry Pi, how to build Docker images, and all this kind of common stuff. Yeah, and it funded a bunch of things. Now we have CashX deploy dev and so on. So we can talk about those.
Nice. Yeah. So assume that we know nothing about Nix. What is Nix? What problem is it solving?
Right. So Nix kind of tries to look at, this was the PhD actually, try to look at software distribution and packaging and apply functional programming kind of thinking to it. This is not how you would today describe Nix, but this was how it used to be, how it came to be. How I would say today is it's a DevOps toolkit where you have kind of one tool that does package manager role. It does software distribution deployments role. It does building of anything you can think of, from developer environments to Docker images. It's the way I like to see it. It's kind of like a small language which allows you to describe your software distribution, whole pipeline and everything.
Yeah. And thank God it's not YAML.
Yes, it is not YAML. It's a fairly small language, but because it's functional, it takes a bit of time for people to kind of grasp the concepts of how it works.
Found that because I'm just in the last day, I've been looking at the language itself, and I was realizing, okay, I have been immersed enough in functional languages that I can look at this and go, sure, I get what you're doing here. But it's like, okay, I'm over the hump.
Yes.
And the people before the hump who are used to, what do we call them? Algol style languages? I don't remember how we classify, C, Java, all these other languages.
The syntax style.
Yeah, that particular syntax style. There's a overarching name, I think, for it. It's like if you're coming from that, you look at this and you go, "What? Why are you?" Because I've had that experience. I was looking at it, going, "Boy, this seems really awkward." And now it's like, "No, that's fine. I get it." Mm-hmm. But you have to have a certain amount of exposure to this other style before it seems natural. And I'm not sure how we shepherd the unwashed masses into this style.
Functional languages and
this is what we've been struggling
away
with
from
for a while. How
YAML, JSON.
How do we make functional languages make sense to people who are I'm responsible partially for making object-oriented programming seem like a good idea. So how do we fix that? I know.
It was at the time, right? I think
I think it was a good hypothesis.
Yes.
And then in the process of actually doing, using it a long time, we've seen, maybe encapsulation, it had a good intention, but the way that it actually works isn't really that big of a help, especially compared to immutability.
Yes. The way I like to think about this is like object-oriented programming is more like how the world works. You have a tree and it has properties, versus functional is more how machines actually work. So it's more modeled towards this is just like one way to look at it. But I think it's it just takes time, and actually, like React in JavaScript did a fantastic job of teaching people functional language principles. Really and I think a lot of people have done React, so if they did it, they already know quite a few. So I think the way to teach people is to get them young and to introduce this concept. and
I've also come to I've started thinking, OO isn't completely useless, because some people will go, "Oh, we made a huge mistake. We should never have done." It's like on the sort of surface level, it's a nice way to package your library, because it handles it provides a nice interface to the library, and you have dot completion, and you've got the constructors and destructors, stuff like that. So for the end user of that library, it does make things nicer. It's just that we took it too far. If we'd have kept it at that surface level, I think we would have been better off. That's just my current thinking.
No, I agree. So, my thinking has always been like, as long as it's a small script and something that will not grow beyond, like a small thing, it's perfectly valid, and it does the job
well. Works in the small, not in the big.
Yeah, we keep running into that. So I am trying to, one of the things that I found confusing about my early brushes with Nix was the difference between Nix and NixOS, and why does NixOS exist? And also, it was just presented as, this is an operating system. And my first thought was, I have to learn another operating system. The stuff that I've seen didn't present it as, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it looks like a Linux distro to me.
Yeah. Yes.
And is it a Linux distro, or did you actually build up a clone of a POSIX system using Nix?
So there's many misnomers in Nix community because it was done such a long time ago and never fixed. but it is a Linux distro. Essentially, it's a bunch of packages glued together with a bunch of configuration. The only thing that is different is that you have like one declarative file that you can kind of copy to a machine and say, okay, this is how I describe my machine, and build it, and this is how it should look, and you can copy to there and build it and kind of activate it, as we say. And this makes it extremely nice, because in the good old days you would go and install one package and another package and configure something, and few months later, probably years, you have no idea how to reproduce that machine anymore. It's just there is no way to go to replicate that.
So this is, let me try to draw an analogy real quick. We did an episode a while back on like event sourcing and the idea that there's two different ways that you can do data in the data world. You can have a table, and when you have a table view of the world, like a traditional database, any updates you do to that table, the event that caused the change in the table is essentially gone after it's performed.
You mutate the table.
You mutate the table
based on the event, and then you don't care about the event.
Yeah, whereas event sourcing says, no, let's not keep a table. Let's keep track of just all the events, and then we can always materialize our state by replaying the events. And so it sounds to me like Nix, or let's start with a traditional operating system. Traditional operating system is like a table. You've lost the history of all the mutations that you did to get to your current state. And so it's very hard to, if you need to recreate your current state, it's very hard to figure out how you got into that state. And I experience pain with this all the time. Whenever I get a new laptop, it takes me days to get it back to the state that I want my laptop in, because there inevitably is some configuration file that I changed at some point and I forgot that I changed that file. And so then I have to, go on this path of remembering all the changes that I made to get to my laptop state.
Humans are so fallible.
So Nick takes a different approach and says, let's keep track of all the changes that need to be made to get to your current state of an operating system that does what you need it to. Is that a correct analogy?
It's how to say, it's half correct. So
okay.
The only difference is that we don't need to keep really the state, like the changes, but because it's not like a thing that you have the history, of course, so you can go back and each kind of like, each time you activate the system, you kind of have a snapshot of what was built and what was that system. But you don't need really the differences, because everything is built from scratch and kind of glued together based on the config file that you're kind of, that's the ultimate source of truth. So there's, I think there's a really good paper that talks about congruent and convergent configuration systems. So convergent is like Ansible. You say, I want this user to exist. So what it needs to do is like, it needs to go to the machine, check if this user exists. If not, it will add it. If it exists, it will, inspect the properties of the user, and then it will do a diff. Does the home exist? Does it not? And so on. And it will try to like kind of converge to the desired state.
Okay.
And I think the congruent is where you kind of build that image kind of, immutably, like you say, here are all the users that should exist, and here you go. And you don't have to do these trickery state things where you have to kind of mutate state, but you kind of just build everything from scratch.
Yeah.
So and of course,
it's the difference between like transformations on immutable data versus mutating a file system or mutating something.
Yes. So the idea is to just build everything as much as we can from scratch. And of course there's, things like there is state, there's configuration data and so on. So those things cannot be done this way, but for the most part we can.
So so the thing is, the way I understand it is that all of these characteristics work if you just install Nix and don't install Nix OS. Is that right? All of these abilities?
Yes.
Okay, so is Nix OS kind of a proof of concept, or I'm still not sure why it exists.
So, so Nix is like really generally applicable. So NixOS was just like, well, actually, you can. So there's Nix packages, which is a collection of 70,000 packages, and
I
it's
was 80,000.
Yeah, now 80.
now 80,000 most up-to-date repository because we have a lot of bots doing automation. The most secure in terms of like the time that we need to take to apply patches and so on. So we've done a lot of automation work because of Nix properties, not because we have superhumans in our community. And yeah, so then the idea is, okay, now we use Nix to create packages, but then what is an operating system? Well, it's packages and configuration stuff. Configuration stuff is nothing more than a simple package which we call a file. And then we build all of that and glue it together, and you have a Linux distribution. And it's not a proof of concept anymore because it's I think NixOS paper came out 2004, or I don't know. It's very old. It came quite quickly after Nix, and it's really, I would say, very widely used operating system these days. Well, Linux distribution, depends on the terminology.
So I can use Nix without having NixOS, and the reason why I would want to do that is because I want to have some software packaging definition defined by the Nix language for whatever, for some server that I'm building or whatever. If I want to have my whole operating system be controlled through Nix and Nix scripts and
Packages,
Nix packages, then I can use NixOS. So I can kind of decide what level I want to be at for my Nix usage. Is that a correct summary?
That is the correct summary. Yeah, there's also a Home Manager, which is kind of like a less ambitious project in terms of not taking the whole operating system, but it will kind of manage your home, user home. So it will manage dot files, configuration files for that user. So that can be used with any Linux distribution or on Mac OS even.
POSIX, anything POSIX, I assume. So since Nix itself is not attached to NixOS, what's the story with the world's largest operating system, Windows? It's like, it seems like you could support Windows with Nix if you wanted to. Is that not true, or?
You mean like as a native? Native, yeah.
Yeah, some kind of native support.
There's quite a few things that are quite hard to implement there. I'm a bit out of sync on that, but with WSL coming and being so good, people stopped caring that much, I think, because it kind of does the job of people to be able to use it. But there's would be some there's some operations that Nix does. For example, if I remember, one of the atomic operations on Linux is a symlink. And when
I was just going to bring up symlinks and that being a challenge.
Yeah, so when Nix switches from what it calls a profile, so that's a snapshot of something you have, it could be just a package or OS or whatever, it will switch a stream link from one tree to another, and this is how it does, what it claims it's atomic, and while you can roll back and all that. So that is not an atomic operation in Windows as far as I'm aware. So all these things become leaky and so on.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Packages. Okay. I know there's a concept of derivations. Is that right? Okay. So there's derivations, but then there's packages. And when I did my WSL installation, I decided, okay, I'll see if I can do the little project that I'm working on now, which is using the Python hatch environment manager. And, anyway. And so, but I had to install Git and Python, and both of those were Nix packages. And I guess anything that I run under NixOS, it has to be a Nix package. Does that
Um,
sound right?
yeah, so that's where it gets a bit tricky. So if you're using NixOS, then um, what the normal any binary you build expects usually is kind of like the interpreter that is kind of encoded. And this is non-existent as a global thing in Nix. So if you just download the binary, from Ubuntu and you kind of run it, it will just not work.
It has to be
Because
packaged as a Nix package.
Exactly. So what we have in Nix is something called patch elf, which patches the elf information of a binary, and it will kind of hard code something to the interpreter and the libraries. So we also have a utility called auto patch elf, which will just kind of discover these things and do it for you. But idea is that you have to like link these things against a specific Nix packages for these things to work. And nowadays there's more things that people develop to make it more seamless, but yes.
So the reason for this is that a normal Linux system is going to have libc in a specific place, and so when a binary runs, it knows where to find libc, and it knows what libc is, and what assumes some version of libc, whatever. So there's a bunch of assumptions that are made about the underlying dependencies, and in Nix, every dependency needs to be explicit and part
Hashed.
of Nix, and so you have to take a binary and make it understand the Nix system, because it can't just go find libc in the usual place or something. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. And I think Nix takes it really far, and I think that there's going to be more and more in the future as people adopt Nix, like helpers, because sometimes you get like government software or something like this, and it just needs to work. So there's quite a few methods out there to run these kind of things. But in general, you don't want that, because then you're back to the old days.
Right.
And
You really want to have it from the ground up, like everything understanding the world of Nix.
But a package takes an existing executable, does it not, and then wraps something around it, or is something else
yes.
going on? Okay.
So what it does is it takes a binary and it will patch and point all the dynamic libraries and pin it, specifically to what is provided by Nix. So it's kind of like a typical build, but instead of building from source, it will just hard code the dynamic libraries and the interpreter, glibc, everything, and you
And
have
it's
a
using
kind of
symlinks for all of that?
it's using patch elf, so it will actually patch the binary and kind of replace the. So usually you would have the interpreter and how to look up the libraries, and then it will just say load lib something.so. But in this case, it will be the full path to the package. So niche/nick/store the hash and glibc 2.3 and so on.
So every package, every part of every package is pinned to a specific
Hash.
Mm-hmm.
And if that hash doesn't exist on that machine, it goes and gets it.
And
that way, there's never a surprise. Like if I happen to be running something and it's using an older version of libc that has a bug in it or something like that, that doesn't show up, because I know exactly every single component that's in my application. But it's not embedded in a binary. It's all linked. And so if you have most of those things, it doesn't have to go download them. It just goes and gets what you need. Okay, so you're nodding. Now, there is another system, which is, you know what I'm talking about, the guys who wrote the Red Book, they're...
Oh, Unison.
So do you know about Unison?
I know about Unison and some of the ideas, but I'm not that familiar.
Because it sounds like a lot of the ideas here hashing everything, and you wouldn't ever
all references being hashed
hash references, and
to
you
hashes.
would never recompile anything unless something changes, and in which case you recompile it, and that thing now has a new hash. All of that sounds like what Unison's been working on as well.
At the programming, like a general purpose programming language level, not so much at the operating system level.
So that's kind of fascinating.
Unison is quite similar in that sense, except it kind of transfers that to general computing
right, and not systems.
Right. Not looking at packaging and building systems in particular.
So a lot of this is targeted at alleviating some of the pain that we've had with portability of a binary, essentially, right? It's like, I've got this program and I want to run it over here. Well, what is that binary essentially linked against? What does it need to run? And Nick says, all right, your Nix package describes everything that it needs in the full tree, so that it always knows how to get a program able to run based on that dependency tree. Is that accurate?
Sounds like
that's accurate. Yes.
Cool.
It knows the full graph of so basically when you build a package, it has the full graph of build dependencies.
Yeah.
And then to determine the runtime dependencies, just kind of scans for these hashes, and everything that it depends on then is a dependency for running because it's in the source.
Yeah.
And then if you copy that, we call it closures. It's a the dependency tree to another machine. You can just run it as long as it's the same system.
Yeah.
So
nice.
one of the really nice things about Nix is replicating developer environments, for example, because you have Linux and macOS support, and you can pin all these things, so anyone can just get the same kind of tooling, and in the old days you would install some software from your favorite distributions, but you had a team of 20 people, and now everybody has a different version, different bugs, and so on.
Yeah. And then all sorts of pain when you end up binding to some native library, and then how does the user install the native library that's needed, and the build chain, so the build chain can support it, just so many challenges. So can understand why the world created Docker, but
yes,
it seems like I don't know, to me, having a declarative dependency definition from what you're building all the way down is a much better approach than just trying to shove a bunch of binaries around. And I don't know, we can talk about Docker and all the issues that I have with it, but maybe too far off topic.
Yeah, well, the way I see this is like Docker was kind of hijacked to solve the building issues, but really they're a bit orthogonal, and they work together really well. So the way I see Docker is it's kind of like runtime isolation, between networking isolation, file system isolation, all that, while something runs, or containers, but Nix is all about the building part. So when you actually glue those two things together, you get kind of like the perfect thing. But on the other hand, when you do let's say local development, I think containers are a complete overkill, because you don't really need a containers in that case. Because usually you want.
It's like people reach for containers for that because that was kind of the only thing available to give you some developer environment consistency, but it was just like such a blunt force object to solving the problem. Like people don't need to go that far.
It's the adapter pattern on steroids.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk a little more about developer environment stuff with Nix, because I have not tried to use Nix as a developer environment. what I'm assuming would happen is, so I do a lot of stuff in Java and Kotlin and Scala, and so I would have a Nix script in my Git repo that would be able to bootstrap my toolchain, so that then I could have, be sure that I've got the right version of Java, that I've got any system dependencies that I need, I've got the build tool, Gradle, SBT, whatever, and so then I could run a Nix shell against my Nix script that's in my Git repo, and now have my development environment set up and ready to go with everything that I need. Was that the
That's
right way to look
correct.
at it?
Yeah. So one of the problems in Nix is that each language has kind of like a different API, and so actually, I don't know if you guys have seen, but I've started this project called devenv.sh
I did see that. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
November, I think, which kind of tries to make this quite simple. So you just say it's kind of like NixOS configuration, but for projects and developer environments. So you can
Yeah.
say languages.java.enable, languages.kotlin.enable, and it will kind of pin everything down and provide you the basic tooling for that language.
Yeah.
And what I would like to do and what I'm working on now is that you can go, between different versions, and you can already like kind of launch processes without containers. So the idea is that when you do local development, you don't use containers, but then you can say build image and upload it to wherever you want, and then for deployment part, you
Yeah.
then use containers, but you're sure that both of these are the same versions running in containers on your machine.
Yeah.
Um,
So I want to extend from the local development to the packaging and like deployment step. So
Mhm.
I would have a Nix script that would define how I get my environment ready for development, but then would I have like another Nix script that would define how my application then gets packaged, and then I would take that Nix script and put it on a server somewhere and be able to bootstrap my essentially server process or something from Nix. Am I thinking about that
Yeah,
right?
that's correct. So you would be able to generate a container, and then you can run it wherever you want, for example.
So
And
you would potentially still use a container as your packaging format for your server if you want to. But
yeah,
do
exactly.
people, so you can do it that way, and then do people also just like in production have a Nix script that builds their production server? Is that an option too, or?
Yeah, you can just copy that thing to any computer and run it. So you're not tied to containers. As long as you can copy to /nix/store, you're good to go. So that's the
Yeah.
only kind of requirement that you
Does it
have.
play well with like VS Code and IntelliJ?
Yeah. So for kind of like these editor integrations, you need to be able to tell the editor, like, kind of run a command to activate the environment and then kind of source that. So I don't know IntelliJ, but I know that for Visual Code Studio, there's like dir-env integration, and they kind of developed like they help develop these extensions for the dir-env, so that you can say, okay, dir-env will load a bash environment, and that will then be kind of like the source of truth for the editor of what is the environment about.
Nice.
And we hope that more editors will support that. Not all of them do, um, but that's kind of like the because then this is kind of nice because you can encapsulate everything, um, and you don't have to access any of the stuff from the system except the editor itself
Yeah.
in that case.
Nice. Yeah, I'll have to mess around with that. I've had a lot of pain trying to do local development with Docker containers, and it's like, do you run your server in a container, but then you lose things like I like to do file watching to, be able to reload my server when I change something, and that doesn't work when your process is in a container, and then the IDE connection with a container, like it's just so much pain. So I like the idea of not doing that, and instead having my editor just be a Nix environment aware, and that would certainly save a lot of pain. So
The
Yeah.
language is, my impression of the language is that the goal is to only do enough to be able to create the I forgot what the term is.
The derivations.
The derivations. Okay.
Yes.
Which is this text description of what's going on. Is that?
Yeah. The language is trying to be minimal so that it's kind of easy to learn. But I always joke, and there's more truth to it than a joke. And I say that Nix is like the JavaScript for DevOps, because the language has some quirks, and honestly, I think if someone would have designed it today, they would have done a different job, and it was not meant to be the DevOps toolkit, just like JavaScript was never meant to run the world. But I'm still hopeful that now that there's a lot more companies coming to the ecosystem, that it will have kind of same fate as JavaScript, that people will nurture it and improve it and make it better.
Yeah.
So kind of developer experience has been a pretty popular topic in the last year or two, and that's where a lot of focus goes to.
Did the Nix language, was it created like at the same time as Nix itself? Like, and maybe I'm getting terminology wrong. Like, I imagine Nix is kind of the there's different pieces to it. One is the language that you define, Nix scripts or whatever, and derivations, and then there's the thing that actually reads those and does something with them. So was the language always there, like from the beginning, or did that come later? What was the history on that?
As far as I know, the language came together with the package manager. Yeah. So that's one of the confusing part, is the naming. So it's the package manager, the language, and then the packages that come are just kind of one implementation of that. There could be another, but it's the only one. So yeah.
I was curious if the language was used elsewhere. We had Gabriella from Dawling on a while back, and it was interesting to see how Daw was being used in a variety of different places in different ways. But is Nix only used in Nix, or people picked it up for other uses as well?
Oh, people have done crazy things with it. What have, I don't know. I think someone wrote a Lisp interpreter in Nix and things like that. So
wow.
I don't think there's many crazy, really useful things, but people always try to be creative, and it's cool. But it's very specific to describing how software is glued together, essentially. So beyond that, I think it has a lot of use beyond art.
Yeah. Well, and I think I read in the documentation somebody described it as this is a domain specific language. This
yes,
is not
exactly.
a general purpose language.
Yes.
Which I think is nice because it makes it less confusing. Because if it's general purpose, you're going, well, when would I ever use this feature? And the answer is, well, you wouldn't. So why is it in the language? Yeah. Whereas here, it's just like, no, all we're doing is creating these derivations. And yes, it has functions, but their goal is to create the derivations.
So, exactly. And actually, GUIX, I never know if that's the right pronunciation, was kind of a friendly fork that Ludovic did many years ago. And their take is that they took Scheme, which is, I think, a Lisp implementation, and is a general language, and they kind of do the same thing, but with a general language. I personally am not a fan of Scheme, but I understand why, and it's kind of an interesting path.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you start with a general purpose language and then try to DSL it into a more constrained thing? And that's what Pants did with Python. We learned about in our last episode, and that's similar to what Gradle did with Groovy and with Kotlin. Or do you just have a language that is intentionally constrained and doesn't, let you do that. I think one of the challenges with what we've seen a lot of times with declarative languages like YAML for Kubernetes, YAML for whatever, is that people pretty quickly reach the bounds of what the language enables you to do, and then you need to figure out, okay, what's my escape hatch?
How do we hack on it?
Yeah, how do we? And they end up, coming up with all sorts of crazy ways to generate the declarative language using yet another language, and it just all falls apart very quickly. Whereas I really like the Nix and Doll approach is like you're going to be constrained, but you're at least going to have some like fundamental things that you likely will need, like functions.
Yes.
Well, yeah, functions, and also I noticed the rec where you're creating this set, and I noticed they're very clear about set, so there's no duplicates. It's just and then sometimes you need to refer to other things within that set definition, so we have a way to do that, and if you didn't have that, it would be messy.
Yeah, so there's a few helpers like that in the language, but essentially it's like, the way I see it is like, it's like JSON with functions. There's JSONNet and QNet and a Q language and so on. And
those are for JSON?
Yeah, those are like more really JSON and functions, whereas Nix is basically the same, except it has this derivation function which does all the heavy lifting of builds. So that's the third component to the language that I would say.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is all starting to make sense to me now. And in the process of installing Nix as my WSL, I ended up wiping out the other one. So it's my only WSL right now. So it's like, and it seems to be working, and I'm curious about, how far can I take this? What do I need to do? So I am continuing to be curious about all of this.
I need to break off a partition on my laptop and install NixOS on it and give it a good solid try, because I just yesterday finally got my audio in Ubuntu actually working. And I intentionally put the tweet for like how I got it working like in a tweet, so that when I get a new laptop, I'm going to remember to go run that same command. But if I just switch to NixOS, then
Twitter is still alive by the time you'll be going back. Where did I put that?
I downloaded my archive, but not since the tweet yesterday.
Right.
So I'll have to go re-download my archive.
Yeah. What I recommend is and what many people do is just to have a virtual machine and kind of try to, if you intend to.
Yeah, we did play with
more.
VirtualBox with NixOS and VirtualBox, and that was a nice way to play with it.
And WSL is kind of a virtual machine. It can crash and burn, and it's not going to bring my Windows down with it.
That's the other way. That is also nice. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, well, because the first instruction was, here's how to install it. Just curl this thing off the internet and let it do whatever it wants on your machine. And we were like going, well, we don't know enough about this to trust that.
Yeah.
So that's when we ended up setting up a VirtualBox to try it out.
Play with it. So people, I think, were correct in telling us that Nix it solves a lot of the things that we complain about, and we need to certainly dive further into it.
I'm fascinated.
And give it a good shot. But so thank you. I'm very excited about diving in further, and I don't know why it took me so long, because people have been telling me for a while.
I do, because the I don't know, the introductory experience is not, it's confusing, and
like all functional programming things.
Well, and I don't think it's just the functional programming, and it's like, I mean, encountering, so there's this thing called Nix, and then there's NixOS, and I'm going, what? And then I mean, there's a number of things that I think are really tuned more towards maybe someone who's already a build engineer,
or somebody who really is thinking about packaging problems and wanting to
have a level of expertise that they're able to look at this. It's not it doesn't have a real introductory onboarding introduction process. Yeah. So that's what I would say kept me, because I'd look at it and go, no, this is too weird. And now I'm to the point where I look at it and go, oh my gosh, this is actually really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and I think a lot of people like want to just ignore that you have to have some way to get to a place where you can run programs.
I did for a long time.
I just want to ignore that is reality and just run a program.
Yeah, sure.
And
it's like, I just want to have a button that deploys everything. That was, kind of
exactly.
Why is it so hard?
Why is it so hard?
With distribution.
Yeah.
You had to go through a lot of pain to come to Nix and for it to be feasible. But one of the things I see that a lot of the companies and the ecosystems are working together now on, like, improving the installer experience, on improving the interfaces, documentation, and developer environments and so on. And I think that will like, increase the adoption quite a bit.
Yeah. I think when, the more people who, because for me, it took a long time to even understand the pain point, especially I do a lot of stuff with Python. And with Python, it's like a lot of times everything just works. You just do global installs and things work okay. And so it's like, oh, why do I have to add this extra thing where I'm managing the environment and everything? Everything seems to work okay. And that makes it worse because you don't get you don't understand the pain if it's like, yeah, I can get it to work on my machine and it's fine and I don't want to hassle with it. And then you have to have that big picture of, oh, there's all these parts and they can all move, they can all change, and they can change and randomly break your thing on another person's machine. So, oh, okay. But it takes a while to come to that realization.
Yeah, you need to lose a lot of hours to understand that you'll never get those back.
That's right.
That's the key.
And if you don't have that experience, if it's like everything's working okay for me for what I'm doing, then this is just like, why are you guys bothering with all of this?
It's kind of similar to what we talked about, with object-oriented programming. You need to spend a lot of time into that debugger to start thinking, maybe there's a better way to model this so that I don't have to spend 4 hours debugging my state. But before that, it's just natural. You're just debugging. That's how you solve problems.
Well, and it's a big mental shift to go from OO, which makes sense in your head, to this other thing, which is like, well, you've just broken everything that I've maybe learned over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Why do I do this? The why is really hard to motivate, I think, in a lot of cases.
It is.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
How did we get here? What do you say? One bad decision at a time, or one, maybe not bad decision.
No, one logical step at a time.
One logical step at a time.
We got where we got, one logical step at a time. But each logical step made sense.
Right.
But then when you see the whole chain of them, you go, okay, but now we've dead ended into a bad place. Yes.
Docker. Docker was got there one logical step at a time, but so where's Nix going? What's the future like?
The future. So now what's happening is there's more and more companies in the ecosystem, and one of the cool things is we kind of recreated the NixOS Foundation, which is kind of a joint. Currently, it's like a joint thing between different companies.
Nice.
And it's kind of vendorless in that sense that it's an open source project and an open source community.
Kind of like the Python Software Foundation.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
And what's happening now is that there's more money coming in, more companies, that we have even 2 VC funded companies now.
Wow.
So I think a lot of these companies are betting, including me, that we will make it as easy that anyone can use Nix, and that it becomes kind of like Docker, and understanding that Docker
It's
has
ubiquitous. Yeah.
it has a smaller surface useful area than it was sold to, and I think Nix will kind of take over some part of that. So more or less, I would say developer experience. This is where Nix is going to
Your
in the
focus.
next years. Yes.
Nice.
That's
That yeah, I think that could make a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the vision of, let's relook at all the foundations and come up with a better way, and the better way has existed and exists, but then how do we get it into the hands of the masses, and that being the kind of the next place you go with all this seems great. What about the cloud story? Well, like I, as you said, like you could always just take your Nix stuff and create a Docker container, run it in Kubernetes or whatever cloud.
Could you also do it with putting Nix OS in the cloud? Is that something people do?
Yeah, of course. There's like this is quite a big topic, and it's really nice. So a lot of the for Amazon, we have just images. You can just run NixOS, and a lot of providers that allow you to do that. There's most likely going to be an NixOS image. But then we have a couple of interesting things. We have something called, it's called key exec feature of kernel, where you can kind of like boot another operating like another kernel that replaces the previous one. And so we have, it's called NixOS Assimilate, or but there's different naming for it. So you can just like kind of bootstrap NixOS. Let's say you take a cloud provider with Debian, and you can just kind of like launch NixOS, and it takes over that machine.
Assimilate, yeah.
Assimilate, yes.
I like it.
Like
like
you
will
Borg.
be assimilated. Yeah.
So, for example, in Europe we have Hetzner, which is crazy cheap. You can get like a 16-core Ryzen for $50 a month, and it's a bare metal. So and you have one command. Non-site folks have written something called NixOS remote, which will just you do declaratively describe your partitioning and your OS and everything, and it will with one command just run over, and you have a NixOS running. So there's a lot of tooling around the cloud that people have done in the past.
Well, it seems like one of the things that you hear stories about so often in cloud stuff is that somebody pushes some configuration change and then it breaks a bunch of stuff. It's always like configuration change. And it seems to me like Nix plus cloud gives you the opportunity to replicate your full environment in a fully reproducible way, and then test and roll back and have all those nice things that you would want in a more reliable kind of execution cloud system. But Nix just would form so much better of a basis for all that than what we have currently.
Yeah. So that's kind of a solved problem. What I expect will happen in the next years, we will probably see some kind of a Heroku, but using Nix that will pop up.
Exactly. The Heroku for Nix. You go OAuth with GitHub and point it to your Nix scripts, and boom, you've got your whole environment and your whole lifecycle management. All your DevOps stuff, just all based on that would be. Hopefully, somebody creates that, because I would definitely be a user.
I'm absolutely sure it will happen.
That's cool. Good. Well, that's exciting.
Nice.
The Heroku for Nix. I like it.
Really interesting.
Cool. Well, anything we missed? Anything? As we're total newbies in the space of Nix.
Hopefully I can talk about this for hours, but the ecosystem is much bigger than just what we talked about. There's like something called NixOS tests, where you can describe different machines, and then kind of like a script that guides and automates. It can say like launch a service there and wait for its port to happen, and then assert a few things. So there is like
The
really
orchestration
cool.
of more than just a single process, orchestration of a whole system. It's like, oh, I need
Yeah,
a database, and the database needs an LDAP, and like kind of construct the whole thing.
Is that a replacement
yeah.
for Kubernetes?
Could be, yeah.
Um, it's in this case it's more used like a testing framework. So you just it's a normal Nix derivation, but we'll launch a bunch of VMs,
Yeah.
run the
Like Docker
automation, and
Compose is like that.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
search the things.
Yeah.
So what I would say is like where anyone could benefit from using Nix is just developer environments. I think that's the smallest step and the most useful one as well.
Yeah.
Just add it to the Git repo and have the tooling provided for your favorite language, for your favorite tooling, and so on.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
that would be the starting point, and then slowly go around and explore the rest of the ecosystem.
Huh. Awesome. Exciting.
Yes.
Well, I'm looking forward to diving further in.
Yeah. I'm intrigued. Before we go,
Yes.
I want to plug the Winter Tech Forum.
Yes.
Which is coming up, and it's
here in Crested Butte,
here
Colorado.
in Crested Butte, Colorado. It's not about skiing and outdoor activities, but we do that.
What's
and
the dates for that?
It is the end of. It's the week of February and March where they overlap.
Okay.
Don't remember the dates
right.
exactly, but if you go to wintertechforum.com, you'll see. And this is all about creating conversations. We don't have speakers. We have open spaces sessions, and we have discussions, and things are happening from the moment you wake up till the moment you collapse into bed. You're interacting with people, and that's the great thing about it.
And I imagine we will spend some time exploring Nix further.
I imagine there will be a workshop on it, and maybe a hack day. Who knows?
Yeah.
Project. So.
Cool. Well, Domen, thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful. And thanks for all your work on Nix, and definitely look forward to diving in further.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun and interesting, quite really good questions about how Nix could be used and how it is used. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Right. Have a good one.
Yeah, bye.